Hey, good evening tonight, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Shrink Wrapped, where I come on Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock and bring another episode of what's happening in mental health today. We've had a lot of really cool people in the past. We've talked to people all the way from Australia, from England to Texas to California. We've had people all over the place we've talked to. Tonight, we're going to get to talk to somebody right in my own backyard, which is kind of fun. A very dear friend of mine who has also been all around the world. You might get to hear some of that story as well. And how we met and how our paths have crossed and how similar really the two of us are. It was like, I think she's actually somehow genetically related. We might talk about maybe our past tonight to see if, in fact, we might truly be genetically related. But anyway, so tonight we're going to be bringing on her, Carol Meyer Willingham, here in a minute. But before I bring her on, I want to talk a little bit about the stage that we're in now in this pandemic. This is September. We've been pandemicking and social isolating and or social distancing. All these things that we're talking about. We've been doing this now for, I guess, since March. It's been quite a while, and where we see, I think, some good things happening and some good things occurring with the virus, with COVID. I know that there's still people suffering with it, and we still have new cases, but I think it's much more under control than it has been, which is very good news. But what we're seeing now, particularly in the mental health world, is I think that people are finally getting extremely tired of it all, and rightly so, because we're having to live in this environment that that it's just not normal. And I talked a little bit about that last week about how we're living in this new norm. They're telling us to this is your new normal, this is your new norm. Well, this new norm that we're in is not normal at all. So when we're walking around trying to identify this new norm, looking down on what is normal from our past, it's almost like we have that out of body experience that we're walking around in this facade, this fog. Really, that's almost a textbook example of dissociation, of how we can completely dissociate. And when that's happening to us on a psychological level for a long amount of time, we're going to get neurotic and even psychotic at times because we're so disoriented internally. And so I think we have to be very aware of that. I think we're seeing that in the clinical world. I know iPhones here in the clinic have been just ringing, ringing, ringing. I mean, there's so many people who want to get in to see people for just help with their anxiety and the depression through these things. And so I want us to be very well aware of that and how to advocate for ourselves. It's very important for us to advocate for our own mental health and our own health care. We sometimes get lost in that. We want to hear from people what to do. And however, we need to let people know what we need and how to express that. And so that's about finding our voice, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight with Carol when she comes on. And so I hope that you guys will share this video. I'll take a little bit of time here for a second for you to have an opportunity to put it out as a watch party for your viewers to get people involved in these conversations about mental health. So without further ado, I would like to bring on my very dear friend and colleague musically and professionally in the clinical world, Ms. Carol Meyer Willingham.
Hey,
Carol, how are you?
Jason!
Thank you for joining me tonight.
Totally.
All the
So
way
glad
from
to be here.
Georgetown, Texas, in your beautiful
Oh,
office.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I was telling or I was telling Carol before we came on, is that she just popped up. I was like, oh man, friend, you look beautiful. It's probably because I've not seen her in like months. And
Much
it's not.
better.
I want to
You didn't
clarify
see
that
me
it's
for
it's
months.
right.
Right.
Yes, and I want to clarify that it's not that you were ugly before. You've always been beautiful, but my gosh, it's so good to see a familiar face and to see a face of a friend. Our lives, as you know, and are so busy. Just professionally,
Yeah.
you're in Georgetown, I'm in Waco.
Yes.
We don't get to cross paths nearly as much as we were at one point, and
Yeah.
I miss that. By the way, we need to start trying to figure out how to do that again.
I
And
know. I know.
yeah. So for people who don't know, Carol is she's a phenomenal singer. She has had a great career in the music industry, and hope she'll share a little bit about that with you tonight. And how we met is actually through that and through music. I don't know that I knew that Carol was a therapist until I think Jeannie Williams, one of our colleagues, Carol,
Yes.
brought
Yeah.
you to Waco, right?
That's
And
right. And that's
because
where I
you
first
knew
met
her,
you. Mhm.
and then you
Right.
met me at my office in Waco, and
Right.
I
Right.
met
Yeah.
you as a therapist.
Hmm.
A therapist that was married to a dentist,
That's
because Jeannie
right.
Williams was
Yeah.
a therapist who was
Jeannie.
married to a dentist. And so at that point, I don't even think I realized that you were actually a singer.
Yes, that's right. Yes, well, this is, of course, my second career. I've been very blessed in my
Yes.
life to experience a love and a passion for two things, and that is music,
Yes.
which my first love only chronologically, I should say, but also as a therapist, I have a deep passion for mental health and
Yes.
working with people. I think it's a great privilege what we do. I think it's an extreme privilege in the fact that people trust therapists to come and tell things that they have
Right.
maybe never ever told anybody. And I
Right.
never let go of that privilege. And or I never stop thinking about what that means, and also the
Yeah.
idea of that as facilitators, that how we can affect things that can even
That's
our
right.
work can affect things that can happen generationally.
Yes.
It's,
Do you know
yeah,
what?
amazing.
In all of that, I think I agree with you 120%, of course, about just, I think, just like it is the privilege that we have to share the journey with these people, but also the incredible amount of responsibility that we have with it as well.
Indeed.
And that
Mhm.
responsibility of keeping that confidential, keeping that private. Everybody deserves their own privacy through their therapeutic process, and really allowing people to come in, and when people come in to trust me in that process. And I think this is what you're saying, that I don't
Yeah,
take that lightly, and I don't take that anything other than a privilege, because people don't have to trust me when they walk into the
that's
office,
right. Yeah.
but they choose to. They choose to for a lot of reasons, and we can talk a little bit about that here as we go on, about just that connection that we can make with our clients, and to making sure they feel comfortable, and given that authentic regard, that positive regard that we talk about, to invite them in. However, I never underestimate the willingness and the bravery that they have when they come in to start opening up about, like you say, things they may have never have told anybody before at all. You know.
Yeah. Extraordinary amount of courage.
Exactly. So I want to welcome tonight Deanne Ducher. She's on. Hey, Deanne, how are you? Welcome back. If you have any questions for Carol along the way, please chime in. And again, you guys share the video with everybody that we're on tonight, because we're going to start hearing a lot about Carol's work as a therapist, and about really finding your voice. Before we get to that, though, Carol, let's tell everybody a little bit about kind of after we met. Of course, we met as clinicians, and I ended up. I don't know if you remember this, but you might. You have a memory like an elephant. But yeah, I at that point, it was right at the time that I had got reacquainted with all of my tour friends, from when I was touring with the Continental Singers and
I
Orchestra,
do remember that.
and
Yes.
I went to a reunion, and it was phenomenal to get to see all of my music friends again. And I had not seen them in 30 years. It was 30 years after we had toured before we had that first reunion. And so I came back, and after that was just, I knew I had to start doing something creative again, and start singing. And I think Jeannie and I started doing some things with Therapy Center Stage. That's when she and I began to start, forming that nonprofit. And for people who don't know what that is, it's Therapy Center Stage Productions, which is a nonprofit that Jeannie Williams and I, she's another therapist and musician, that we started that nonprofit organization here in Waco to help bring awareness to mental health through the expressive powers of or through the creative or healing powers of the expressive and creative arts. And at that point, Jeannie was like, did you remember that Carol Meyer Willingham that you met? She's a really good singer. We should get her involved. And I was like, okay, as long as she's a good singer. I mean, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to make
Let's
sure
see how she
I want
does.
to make
Right.
sure she's good. Let's let her audition,
Yeah.
folks. Let me just tell you, I had no idea what I was talking about, because I want people to hear your career as a musician is, and I know you don't talk about it much because you're not the kind of person who says, "Oh, here's what I've done." But
Right.
folks, we're talking to somebody who had a 9-year career at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York City, a
Yes.
Grammy nominee. Hello, you've done a
Mhm.
numerous amount of work with your music career. Tell everybody a little bit about what you've done musically.
Well, as you said, I was a professional singer. I think round about it's hard to put a beginning and an end date on it. I
Right.
know that
There is
I
no
started.
end date, by the way.
There is no end date. That's right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I grew up in a family where my dad was a barbershop singer. So kind of I was very surrounded by that, and there was a
Yes.
lot of encouragement that way with music. And I started to sing probably when I was about 13 or so.
Hmm.
My path led, and this is part of the finding one's voice comes in with this.
Hmm.
I started out thinking I was going to be a teacher in high school somewhere in Iowa because that's where
Hmm.
I'm from and that's
Right.
what you do and you like to sing. But then, fate had other plans there, and went to the University of Iowa and studied with a man named John
John
Vancura.
Ventura.
Yes, who
Yes.
was on the faculty at Baylor for many years,
Hmm.
affectionately known by his students as VC.
VC. Yeah.
And so that really turned my head in a number of ways,
Hmm.
and really started the development of the voice. And is just kind of a way of introduction with that, that talk about truly experiencing, finding one's authentic voice as a singer, which then, of course,
Right.
into really what I did later. But I also, after I got my bachelor's, I studied in Europe for a couple of years in Salzburg, in Austria, and then came
Right.
back, did my master's, and went to New York. And a lot of regional, a lot of international work.
Hmm.
I did a specialization towards the end of my active career in a lot of contemporary music, which took me to
Was that
some pretty wild
Was
places.
it Richard Saltzman who did you work with?
Yes, yeah,
Yes.
Richard Stoltzman, that's the
The
Grammy nominee that I
right.
had.
Right.
Yeah, worked for
Yes.
them, and
Yes.
it's wonderful stuff. Going to places as far-flung as Uzbekistan and singing
Right.
in Mongolia and the Gobi Desert. All this really
Right.
kind of wild
Yes.
stuff that was, almost counterculture, but was also kind of related to my opera career as well. So
Yeah.
it's very
Definitely.
fulfilling.
Yeah, and how cool is that for you to be able to see and follow that? So many people want to do that, and they strive to do that, and they want to have those experiences, and never are never able to achieve that level of success. And for people who have actually had an opportunity to sing around the world and to do those things, again, I think we take that as it's a privilege. It's definitely a privilege.
Definitely,
Definitely, it was
definitely.
hard work, but I want to say that there's a little bit of is the right word, fate in that a little bit too. That
Yeah,
you're just at the right place at the right time to be able to do these things. And
yeah,
so, for people who are out there who are finding their musical voice and those things, to never give up on your passion to sing or sing wherever you are, create music wherever you are, and
Mhm.
it's going to reach the magnitudes. You don't have to be in the Gobi Desert or on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera to do that.
Right.
However, you never know when you might be on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera. I mean, did
That's
you
right.
did you
And
ever
that
think that
was,
that
I
was
mean,
going to be you when you
I
were
was
when you were
ready
yodeling
for
with those
her. I
cattle in
never thought that would
Iowa?
happen. Hmm.
When you were yodeling with those cattle in Iowa, did you ever think you would be on the opera stage?
Not in a million years.
Yeah, but how fun is it?
No, not in a
And
million years. Yeah,
so
definitely.
for
Yeah.
people, when I came back, then this is Carol's passion, and this is what she was doing. Of course, we're going to talk about the therapy in a minute, which is what you're on
Hmm.
tonight for. But I then
Hmm.
started training with you vocally, and
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
boy, did you change! You changed my voice, and you helped
Hmm.
me find a voice. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, because not only was it a musical journey for me, it was also a very personal journey in finding my
Hmm.
own identity and my own voice and what that
Yeah.
meant,
Yeah.
and about not trying to mimic somebody else like Bryn Terfel, who's one of my favorite all-time baritones. I mean, just love him, but he is just a baritone like this. I mean, he has that,
Hmm.
which I don't. I mean, my voice, when you hear me, I don't really sound too deep, and so I can't produce it. But
You
so
have
I
a
tried to.
beautiful voice.
Well,
Beautiful, beautiful.
thank you, but I tried to mimic Bryn for a long time, and it never worked. And through your help,
Hmm.
I kept hearing you over and over again say, "Jason, authentic self, authentic self. Listen to your voice, your voice. What happens to you, your thing," and that helped
Yeah.
me become more and more and more confident in the
Hmm.
fact that my uniqueness wasn't a weakness, but it was actually what made me me. So I give
Yeah.
you a lot of credit, and I thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
So that's part of your therapeutic work that you did with me when you didn't even know maybe that's what was happening therapeutically. So
Yeah, yeah.
musically it was happening, but therapeutically it was happening as well. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
thank
it
you for
does.
that.
It's a dual process that comes
Yeah.
together, definitely. They're very much interconnected.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Hmm.
and so we've done some things together. We've sang together. We've done all kinds of stuff, which has been so fun, and we'll do it again, I'm sure. But
Oh yeah.
tonight we're here to talk about your journey after that. So you left.
Hmm.
You didn't leave New York, but what you did is you left the musical scene
Yep.
after your stint there at the Metropolitan Opera, and
Right.
you went back to
Hmm.
NYU to Langone, I think, to get your or is Blanton Peele. Blanton Peele's where you
I know
did your
at NYU for my MSW.
yes, and
Hmm.
to get your social work degree. So tell us a
Hmm.
little bit about what was that process like for you going from music, being very successful in your career there, to transitioning over into a very brand new career.
It was. I'd like to say that it was without its bumps, but it
Right.
definitely did have its bumps because for
Sure.
my identity for so many decades had been wrapped up in, and understandably so, how I sounded and how I presented. Now,
Right.
one of the tenets, I think, or one of the things that I think singers who become therapists have,
Right.
and also there are a lot of, and you may know a lot of people who are attracted to our business who have a
Hmm.
background in English literature, for example.
Right.
We
Right.
listen, we hear themes, so that's how we learn our music, and
Hmm.
so it's kind of second nature to us. So it was tough in terms of, I said, whoa, I can know, I all of a sudden have to put, in order to prove myself in an academic program, I'm going to be judged by the words I put down on a piece of paper rather than how my voice sounds. So that was a huge transition.
Wow. And
Um,
so to hear you say that, my transition was actually in some ways kind of the opposite. I went to
uh,
school for being a therapist, did all that first, was in a therapeutic
okay.
career, and then all of a sudden I had to switch back, because I was a musician earlier, but I did have to
Yeah.
switch back to the opposite of what you're talking about. So there
Yeah.
is there I understand that bridge that you're talking about.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of it is that I was trained very technically, my as having studied with me. So
Yes,
I'm a tweaker. I build off of things,
that's
which
right.
also
That's right.
really helps in terms of being a therapist. You hear themes. I'm also very family systems trained. That
Right.
was my postgrad work at Blanton Peel,
Right.
which is basically while I was really kind of struggling to find my identity, which was tougher at NYU. It came. I think it's social work, and it's a wonderful program. But it's very broad.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
in order to, and you can do a lot with it, but that's one of the reasons I went on for postgrad work in marriage and family therapy,
Hmm.
to be able, partially as a business decision, as wanted to be able to have the skills. The
Right.
skills and the techniques were very, very important to me. I'm a technician.
That's right.
So, knowing all the family systems and also being able then and then to do the individual work as well, still thinking in terms
Hmm.
of systems was also very good. So it was really at that point where it started to kind of come together, and I felt my identity coalesce
Hmm.
much more as a therapist.
Hmm.
And it was at that point I became turned on by the just I don't know, you're throwing around a lot of theorists here,
Right.
and
Right.
I don't quite know how this happened, but I remember I was turned on to the work of Carol Gilligan. At that
Yes.
point, one of the early feminist writers
Hmm.
in the early 90s. That kind of led on to what is now the Wellesley Center for Women, and at that point was known as the Stone Center. A lot of the
Right.
relational cultural theory I just loved. Carol Gilligan really resonated with me, particularly in her book called In a Different Voice.
Hmm.
And that was about how, particularly with her work with girls, she
Hmm.
began to find how girls would actually sacrifice parts of themselves in order to save the relationship.
Wow.
Yeah,
And so, boy,
and
talk about dissociative kinds of
oh
a
my
feel,
gosh,
right? That
yeah,
separating parts of themselves. Really, that's kind of what I think we're seeing right now with this pandemic. I was talking about
yeah,
how, man, that's like that separation from reality versus where we are becomes very neurotic. So yeah, so from
indeed.
there, then that
Mhm.
really kind of got you interested in this finding your voice and
It was a specific quote, and I actually was able to find it in my paper from many moons ago that
yeah,
really
good.
resonated with me with her. And this is what Gilligan says. She says she's learned about resonance. She talked about her fascination with
Uh huh.
voices from in the physical sense, and she
Right.
says she's learned about resonance, and she's come to a new way of understanding how the voice speaks in relationship, how it is expanded or constricted by relational ties.
Wow.
Now that sat with me a lot.
What an observation,
Mhm.
about the expansion of that. So speak to that a little bit, Carol. When that
Sure.
captivated you, what about that really resonated?
It resonated because I could think of examples. I was trained to use by VC Dr. Vancura
Mm-hmm.
to really use the totality of my voice. A lot of times that
Mm-hmm.
people were very surprised when I would sing very high notes because they said, "Well, you don't speak like a soprano." I said, "Well, what's a soprano supposed to speak like?" I guess the assumption was you're supposed to be
Well,
up
I
here
guess
somewhere
like this.
like this.
Yeah, like this. I don't know what does that sound like. Yeah. Do you know, it's interesting because, a lot of times, people assumed, I don't know what they've assumed about me, but I assume in my own identity, my own audition in my own head, I don't sound like a bass or a bass
Yeah.
or somebody who sings very low. And I don't really sing very low. However, I never really identified with anybody that sang very high. So it was very difficult for me to identify as a baritone. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know
Yeah.
why. It was
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
I thought I had to be one or the other. I couldn't be in the middle.
And also to that end, and this goes, you know this from the training with me, is that you basically you a couple of things. VC definitely told me that you teach the whole person.
Hmm.
And then you also that the voice is also part of your identity,
Hmm.
and also that when you sing, you sing in a way which embraces all of the totality of the vocal cords. Okay, what that means in
Hmm.
plain English, best way to describe it: if you ever have a massage and you get out of the massage and you're going like, wow, what happened to my voice? That's
Yes.
the sort of deal.
Yes.
What you've done is you lessened the constriction.
Yes.
You've lessened the constriction thoracically. You've lessened, and that's where it really became fascinating to me. I could hear, and I've heard it for years. There's probably a book in here somewhere if I ever get any time. But I could actually hear because of my training for decades
Right.
with the physiology of how voices work and how you work with voices. I
Right.
could hear the constriction. And the interesting thing that I began to find, and particularly in working with couples, I worked with a lot of couples, is you would hear how, and it was, to be fair, a lot of times because women do get sent this signal to be,
Hmm.
okay, I'm just gonna, make less
Yeah.
of my voice because it's societally acceptable to do so.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
when they began to engage with the authentic voice, you could actually hear the change.
Wow.
You could hear it
Wow.
physiologically, and then the power in that.
Well, but to say, when you hear that physiological change happen and then they
Yeah,
auditorily hear it, then it's produced differently, it echoes differently in your body, and then at
right.
that particular point you begin to feel it. And boy, the power that comes with that awareness, number one, or the
Oh
power that
yeah.
comes with the confidence that can give for them to find their physical voice, but also find the voice within their emotional voice, their intellectual voice, to be able to be heard, to be assertive in their
Yes.
communication,
Yes.
to where they can at that point express themselves. You were talking about the constriction in the voice and about the constriction in the thoracic area and how all that just gets constricted and how you can't really sing. You can't sing like that either. And you and I, numerous times when we were working together, and when we worked together with vocally, we would always talk about the game of opposites, and why I just kind of giggle because I remember in my head. Um, you should see. We ought to actually video record and FaceTime or live stream a vocal lesson sometimes for people, because
Yeah.
I would walk around the room like an ape, just just wondering,
Yeah, yeah, right,
just to
right.
let go of the constriction to where I could actually produce the voice, right?
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you have to purposefully go the opposite direction to be completely feeling out of control, that blah blah blah,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
actually learn that that's what actually gives what other people perceive as the control. It's strange,
Mhm.
and then how that, so like you're talking about here, clinically, just fits in a clinical, interpersonal, interrelational model of
Mhm. Mhm.
finding your voice in
Mhm.
relationships.
One of the key things that I discovered, because of course I was a voice teacher before I was a
Hmm.
therapist, and also then concurrently I still do a few lessons. But one of the things I found, which fascinated me over and over again, was that there is a catharsis that one generally goes through when they break through into that authentic voice when they're singing. And a
Hmm.
lot of times, particularly in women, many times it will involve tears. That's just the kind of the confusion, because they feel this. It's like you're letting go of this other person. I mean,
Wow.
you are the same person, but you're much more, with a lack of constriction and singing into the voice. For
Right.
men, a lot of times it's anger, and then they break through to it and they get used to that sound.
Yes.
And I found it was a similar process. Also, there's a catharsis. Oftentimes, I mean, if you follow the model of depression, for example, depression is anger turned inward.
Right.
Depression is also the inwardness of that. Again, it's back to that sort of thoracic holding again.
Yes.
And to let that go, and
Yeah.
and
Right.
sometimes people don't always like that
Yeah,
when
no. Yeah, and both sides.
yeah,
The person who's finding the voice sometimes doesn't like it right away because it's scary for them. The
yeah,
person that's receiving it doesn't like it right away because, boy, there's some resistance that they've never had before.
precisely.
And so in that tug of war back and forth of how to learn how to be assertive and be okay with being assertive and setting those boundaries
Yes,
is something
yes.
very difficult to help people do. So,
Hmm.
guys, we're talking tonight to Carol Meyer Willingham, who is a professional singer and a licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Georgetown and in Slater, Texas. She and I have known each other for quite some time, just both musically and clinically. And so I want to give a shout out to a couple of people that are joining us. Larry Harmon. How you doing, Larry? Welcome. Marie Camp, all the way from Florida. How Mrs. Camp? Also, Rick Weitzel, Skeeta Jenkins. Hey, Skeeta. And so you guys welcome. Again, share the video with people to let people know that these conversations are happening. Tonight's conversation, if you want to share it, particularly, Carol, I think for women and young girls, it's so important to be able to find that voice, and not that it's not important for men and for young men as well. I think we still need to do that for our youth. But something was, when you were talking about that, was really striking me about how you can actually help women learn how to be assertive in these relationships that are sometimes can be relatively abusive.
Yes.
I'm sure you deal with that in your therapy. How do you find a way to help somebody, say a lady who has, like you're talking about, been very restrictive, very meek, very I don't want to say controlled, but sometimes that is the case.
Yes, sometimes it is.
How do you help them come out of that shell and find that voice?
Well, I first of all, I validate their experience, and a lot of validation, and when that in itself, to have somebody listen,
Hmm.
you talk about the privilege. We're talking about that we have as therapists to hear this.
Right.
You think about that. Why they haven't, some of these people never trusted anybody. Why would they trust us?
Yeah, absolutely
So
right.
then by organically, building the trust and feeling it with them, I've always loved the German word for empathy, which is einfühlen, and which means to feel into. That's what we're basically doing. And then, I go with that for quite a while. I'm a lot of my training is in long-term work, psychodynamic, and with a slice of psychoanalytic in it, but we're kind of all a hybrid of a lot of it,
Right.
But so eventually what I've really learned is that being able to model for them the anger that they weren't able to have.
Wow.
When they were helpless, when they were terrified, when they were maybe fighting for their lives. And that is the difference. And that when you hear that engagement with that voice, and sometimes, and I model it in such a way where I'm able to modulate it. It isn't like I'm yelling out, that's not fair. It's not that. Because that would traumatize them again. But being able to be assertive, to be able to be direct and assertive, and then helping them to break through that denial, and to be able to say, no, you're right. I did say no. You're right. That shouldn't have happened. You're right. He or she shouldn't have done that. And that is extremely powerful.
Yeah, and then to help them get to the point to where that they're not apologetic about setting that boundary.
Absolutely.
So many times I think I have found, just in my own clinical work with these people, they get to the point in the therapy sessions that they can really begin to verbalize that and see it. How do you help them take that from inside the office to outside the office when they're afraid if they go home and set these boundaries and have that very vocal, assertive voice? That they're afraid that there's going to be some kind of a recourse or some kind of an action back. How do you help them prepare them for those kinds of things?
Well, I definitely assess for safety to begin. First and foremost.
Very
because
important.
It is.
Right.
I've got to get them. It's contraindicated actually if I work in those skills, knowing that they're going to go home to someone who might beat them up that night.
Right.
So I've got to be very careful with that. So a lot of that sort of denial, first of all, and a lot of times, and it's not just women.
No, you're right. Very good point. So for people who are listening and people who will hear this on the rebroadcast, trauma is not always happening to women. Men can also be very traumatized in relationships and be the victim of a lot of physical abuse from women. We don't think about that necessarily so much. Right.
Yeah, so they basically, if they can, then I have to assess for the safety, and then I put on a heavy social worker hat at that point.
Right.
Let's talk about safety plan, because I really can't begin to have that conversation with them until we can break through the denial of the grave situation that they are in. Then I can start to do the work later on, like quite frankly, if they're separated.
Right.
At that point.
Yeah.
But if it's also, it's a little bit different, of course, if you're confronting, a parent who abused you, or if it's, then, you may never get to have that sort of thing that we hope for, or that we maybe see on the talk shows or something, where that parent's going to go, you're right.
But the validation that so many times that we get into our head that we'll never get it, and we strive for it so much that we long for it. Sometimes it doesn't come. Sometimes the validation has to come from within the person.
From the person, and also that I work a lot going through every voice has a core, right? So that's where I work in terms of helping people to realize that you've got this core that nobody gets.
Right.
Your spouse doesn't get that core. Your parents don't get that core. No one gets that core. Codependence is when you give away that core.
Oh, that's a beautiful way of putting that. Sometimes
you're giving away your voice.
You're giving away your voice. Dr. Raylene Stotts was one of my mentors when I was in graduate school, and was one of my LPC supervisors in my postgraduate work. And she often talked about giving away our roses. For example, we have a dozen roses, and we like somebody, so we give them a rose. So we have at that point 11 for ourselves. We meet somebody else, and we really like them, so we're going to give them two roses. So now we only have 9 for ourselves. Well, then we come down to the person that we want to meet, and what do? Well, we give them 9 roses because they're extremely special to us. And when we've given them all those 9 roses, and then any of those people walk away, we're left with nothing. We're left with nothing.
In essence, you're coreless.
You're coreless.
You're roseless.
Yeah, you're roseless and you're coreless. And when you're roseless and coreless, that's a problem. And so you've got to hang on to that core, and you've got to hang on to at least one rose. That way, if somebody walks away from you, you can plant that and make another bush. You still can rebuild. So. We're joined by Kathy Itz. Hello, Kathy. You're joining us, I think, from South Texas, and also Johnny and Sharon Letney from Fairfield. Hello, guys. Welcome. We're talking with Carol Meyer Willingham, who is a professional singer and also a professional therapist in Georgetown and Waco. And, guys, you can reach Carol if anybody's in the Georgetown and Salado area that's looking for a therapist, Carol. Also, make sure that we put your website up there, www.carolmeyerwillingham.com. Reach out to her if she has any openings. I'm sure that she would take you in as a client. Also, Lori Seifer. Hey, Lori. This is a great analogy about the core and about the flowers and the roses. I think that's a way that we can begin to help people understanding kind of what codependency looks like. If we give them a visual, it's a very complex thing. So back to the core and the core work of finding the voice. You did an entire paper on that. You researched it and you did a paper. Talk to us a little bit about what your research was about.
My research is basically looking and seeing, again, because it was a family setting, and I think it was a mother and 2 daughters that I had for my, my paper that I used, that I've seen for almost the entire time, the 2 years that I was in residency in this postgrad program. But a lot of what it revealed, and I didn't set out to have it be totally a woman dynamic. It just came out that way. It seemed like, it seemed like a good fit. They signed releases, and away we go, And then I began to kind of...
Which is what happens with research sometimes. You research with the people who give you permission to research.
That's right. I mean, it was kind of like the perfect marriage in a lot of ways, because at the same time, I think I was attracted to studying the voice. Then I began to know, particularly in the teenage girls in particular, it struck me, of course, drawing on the work of Gilgan, and the mother, and I found the meekness in the mother, and the subservience, what she had learned, and then with the daughters, of course, and she did not know what to do with their having a voice. So that's what my work really kind of came down to, in the clinical sense, is how did we work with them, with the mother also being able to find her voice, so that she could join the daughters in the dialogue, in the communication, rather than abdicating. Because she would go into the depressive state then as a result of that. So when I basically came out of that finding is that, and this is something that has resonated over and over and over, and I've been in private practice now for about 11 years, of again, this sort of, to lose one's voice in a relationship in particular is to lose oneself, to lose one's identity, to lose the uniqueness. Our voice is made up of, how large our head size is, and, cheekbones, maybe even how many fillings we have in our mouth, I mean, minute things. It's very unique to how we sound. Yes. And that's also, I think, resonates with people being able to to relax
Mm-hmm.
into who they truly are.
Right.
And that's tough because if they've been sent a signal, particularly when they're growing up or in a relationship,
Right.
that they can't have that voice, that voice is threatening to whoever they're with,
Mm-hmm.
then you start going down the shame cycle path.
Right. Right.
Like I feel guilty for you'll actually see it. Oh, you'll
Yeah,
see
you
it. I feel
do. You
guilty
do.
for saying this.
And what
They'll
you're
grab the throat.
and what you're talking about is you're talking about helping them find their authentic self. You know, and
Precisely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
The voice is symbolic.
yeah, the voice, absolutely, and the voice then is
Mhm.
symbolic of that authentic self that you
Right.
help people through this process to be able to identify, whether that's the abuser or the abusee. I mean, a lot of times, the abusers, and I say that not accusatory, but I say that
Right.
as the person who's the
Dynamically.
aggressor, right? The dynamically. So that person who's the aggressor, so many times we see them as the person who is the perpetrator or whatever. And yeah, they are. But I think what we can't forget in our work with them is they're perpetrating for a reason as well. And sometimes if we can help
in their pain.
Absolutely right. And if we can help them find their authentic self, maybe the
Yes.
perpetration stops. So therefore, then it's reflected in their voice and finding their more authentic voice, which is how their internal self and that authentic self is portrayed. So very interesting work. I mean, it's amazing how complex communication patterns are, right?
Yeah.
In so many times, which it complicates all of that. So very interesting work, Carol. Have you ever done or ever thought about doing any follow-up research on any of these things?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I get busy like everybody else does,
Oh
but I
yes, oh,
think that
yes.
the biggest thing that I can't help myself after so many years of studying the voice intrinsically of learning. It's an interesting sort of sidebar here. I would so much of what I learned in terms of techniques and how to be a therapist was already coming out of what I'd learned in voice lessons. And I used to call, I don't know if Kim or John are on tonight or if they see this, but I used to call VC. Then after I get out of this one particular group supervision, and say, "Oh, VC, I love you. You've been saying the same thing."
Yeah. If only I would have listened to you. Yeah. No.
And also another thing that he did so exquisitely, which my voice teacher John Vancura, what he did so exquisitely that I've really taken into my work. He would, I probably done it with you, is I would do just as an experiment. Let's see what happens if you were to do X or something.
Oh yeah.
And suddenly people really relax. Okay, this is just an experiment,
Right. Exactly.
This isn't real life.
Yes. Do you know how hard that was? You have done that with me, by the way. And do you know how hard that was for me coming in as someone who is very, very, very self-aware? A lot of people view me, and it's kind of funny. So many people view me as an extrovert, that I'm this big extrovert, that I just know everybody, I can get along with everybody. I'm always on the stage doing something, and where that's very true. I do have a very gregarious personality, I believe, and I don't know any strangers, kind of a thing. However, I am the most extreme introvert on the planet, meaning that my alone time, the way I think, the way I process information, the way that all of this is very internal. And so for me to be out there like that when I'm not in control of it, there's the thing. When I'm not in control of it, it is extremely difficult for me to do. So, guys, when Carol says to me the first time, "Oh, let's wonder what it would be like. Let's just experiment," I was like, "No way in the world.
No experimenting.
No experimenting. I am not walking around this living room like a monkey with my hands dragging the ground. However, it's liberating after you do it. I don't know how to describe that. Once you break through that constricted thought
Well,
And,
you
and
know those times that you've had to, and I think every therapist has had this. This is why we get out of bed in the morning is when and sometimes it's the sessions where you really don't say that much, that you're basically just attending,
yes,
and
yes.
they'll get to the end of it and they'll say, and you feel the relaxation and they say, oh my God, I feel so much better, and
Yes,
you'll
yes.
actually feel the voice just that's that sort of relaxation, that's the sort of going into authentic self. It was fascinating. My first internship when I was at NYU was working with mandated substance abusers in Brooklyn, that were all coming out of Rikers Island. They were youth offenders, between largely male, between the age of 17 and 25. Well, it was fascinating because they would get to that I feel better.
Hmm.
Because of the population it was, where they were going back out on the streets, then because they were out on parole,
Right.
they would get to my door and they would put on the suit again,
Wow.
just to be able to and quite audibly give a sniff a lot of times to just and the symphony in that.
Wow. Isn't that amazing?
And I was kind of left with this, but this person was just relaxed and maybe even in tears, 10 minutes ago.
Yes.
And now they're having to put on the armor. So that brings
right.
us another point. So, I mean, there's a lot of layers to this in terms of what is our authentic voice. I don't know about you, but
Right.
one of the things that's fascinating me is the divide between the authenticity of who we truly are and the sociological expectations.
Very much so. Well, that's exactly what I was describing to you. Is I have had to so long fit, particularly in college, when I was always up in front of people. Michelle and I, my wife Michelle, and I talked about this not long ago, that I was always at Mary Hardin Baylor, because I was a music major. I was always up in front of people. I was always I played the piano at every chapel service. I was singing in the choirs. I was singing, and so people automatically thought that I was the societal part of what you're talking about, automatically thought that I was this very outgoing, very extroverted, very gregarious person who just wanted to be the life of the party. When after the fact, after a concert or after I would play the piano, I would exit the side door and leave. I was gone. I didn't I wasn't around the meet and greet. And when I had to be, it was so uncomfortable because it wasn't my authentic self. That wasn't. And so that divide that you talk about so resonates, I think, with me and probably anybody and everybody who will listen to this interview, about finding where is that divide, what's that divide about, and how wide is the divide.
How wide is the divide? Yes.
And so for me, it was very, very, very wide at points, to where I felt very neurotic and very anxious and very anxiety ridden, because it was such a big gap in between that. When they have those gaps, how do you address it in your therapy with them, Carol? How do you get to the point to where you help them identify what that is and maybe what's causing the divide?
I think that I look at, for one thing, I freely tell them, what I'm just telling you is, in my work, I found it fascinating from an observational perspective, because I'm not doing, hard and fast research here. So I'll generally approach it like that, is on an attempt to normalize it. I mean, how prevalent this is.
Right.
They think that there's something wrong with them within the context of whatever messages they're getting from a culture, which maybe doesn't fit for them.
Right.
That I'll. And usually I will get, and I'm sure you do too. So it's not just me. It's, oh no.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or pieces of things that I feel comfortable in disclosing about my own journey.
Yes.
That's part of it too.
Right.
I know for myself. I was always, I was always a bit of a nerd, but I could, get up and make loud noises. So then I think people all assumed that I was just this extrovert all the time, and I said, no, there's this other side of me like you that
very much.
and also one of the key things is very interesting is, and a lot of people who don't know her don't know this, and a lot of people who do know her know this. Renee Fleming is self-professed, is quite a shy person.
Yeah, very introverted person. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
and boy, what a voice too, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Lovely soul. Lovely soul. So
yes.
Yeah, and being able to kind of following that back to either the game of opposites, or as you're talking about, or also just the kind of like, I was really struck like last week what you were talking about with Sunny when you had on, and this being of course Suicide Awareness Month.
That's
and
right.
then all of how that all comes together. And I was doing some thoughts. I think I even jotted it down as he was talking. I said, suicide is really the final annihilation of the voice. Well, of course it is in a physical sense. But it is, what happens to a person when they get to that space where they feel that no one will hear my voice.
Right.
And one of the things that right away when I put up my website a million years ago, and I wanted this key phrase, and it's on my website, when you first open up, it says, everyone has a voice, everyone has something to say.
Yes.
And to feel in some way or another that you can't say anything, or I think, the suicidal ideation going into attempts, is largely about giving up hope. And in the absence of hope, and I think that so it's hopeless if I have something to say,
nobody wants to hear
it. Nobody wants to hear it.
Absolutely. And so for people who have anybody that they know, or if you might be watching tonight, or you're watching the rebroadcast, and you have some of these symptoms and some of these experiences that you're feeling as though you're not being heard, that you don't have a voice. You absolutely do. We want to encourage you to reach out to the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-TALK. It's 8255. So 1-800-273-8255. You can also reach out to the Treatment Referral Helpline at 1-877-726-4727, and we'll help you find somebody in your area that you can speak to. I think we as therapists would be remiss if we didn't give you these numbers and these helpline numbers. People really truly do care. These hotlines are staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for people who want to hear your story and who want to encourage you to utilize the voice, as Carol's been speaking about tonight. And also for Carol, on your website, you mentioned it again. We want to make sure people know it's www.carolmeyerwillingham.com. Go to her website there. And if you are in the Salado, Georgetown area and need a therapist, I might know a good one. Her name is Carol Meyer Willingham, and so give her a shout out, give her a ring. Regina Krause is joining us. Hey, Regina, and also Eli Pratt. You guys, thanks for coming on tonight and watching and with us. Carol, it's been a fun night. This is we're giving people a glimpse, a little bit about kind of what our vocal lessons were about when I would train with you, and just in our car rides to CE conferences together.
Right.
Those are fun days, and coming back to the stores and getting those dadgum little ice cream balls. What were those called? I don't even. Would you say mochi? Mochis. I don't even like ice cream, guys, and I was chowing down on those suckers. I mean, they were. Hey, Rick Weitzel, you're welcome, mate. Thanks for stopping in. You and I need to have coffee soon, Rick. Actually, I haven't seen you in forever. And Carol, you and I,
and ramen.
Yeah, and ramen. Carol, you and I. Okay, so let's tell people that story before we leave tonight too. So Carol calls me up. Carol and I always send a text messages back and forth with each other about, look at this ramen noodles, or look at this dish, or look at this coffee, or whatever, all kinds of things. So we decide we're going to go have lunch, and we're going to go eat ramen at Meg's and Temple. So we are like stoked about it. Carol, finish the story. I'll let you have the honors. Finish the story. We go to Meg's and.
Okay, so.
What's that?
All right, so hey, meet me. So yeah, so of course, the therapist, you never have the same schedules, right?
Right,
So,
no.
Friday works. Okay, so we get there, and I've been telling him about this is the authentic stuff.
That's
This
right.
is
This is the real
really,
deal.
really, really good. Oh my God, you're gonna want to take a bath in this stuff. It's so good,
Right.
right? So anyway, so we get there, so we'll have 2 bowls of ramen. We don't have ramen today.
And we're like, yeah, you do.
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
you
Go
have
back
you
there.
have a cook and you have the ingredients in the kitchen.
Go
uh,
back there and find it.
do you know they never took us up on the deal? We're gonna have to go back on a weekend to have our ramen, but
Yeah, like
yeah,
call
but we
ahead.
need to do
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah.
Well,
No.
thank you so much, Carol, for joining me tonight.
You are so welcome.
I just
Yes.
love you dearly. You're a very dear
Yes,
friend,
love you
and
too. Yeah,
I
totally.
thank you so much for what you've done, just in both the professional singing world
Thank
and for
you.
me.
Thank you for what you bring to
Oh,
all
well, I
of this and
appreciate
your
that.
career. And yeah, definitely.
Yeah, in the
Definitely.
clinical world. So, guys, again, tonight we've been talking to Carol Meyer Willingham. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and licensed clinical social worker in the Georgetown and Slato, Texas area. You can visit her website at www.carolmeyerwillingham.com. And I would love to have you back, Carol, sometimes if you would
I'll be
agree to
on.
it. All right, great. Thank you so much, Carol.
You're welcome.
All right,
Okay.
take
All
care of
right.
yourself. Talk to you
Okay. Bye
soon.
bye. All right. Bye.
You guys, thank you for joining in tonight for another episode of Stringcraft. Always love having my guest on. Tonight was extra special with a very dear friend of mine. So thank you guys for your comments. Please share the video for people who maybe have not gotten a chance to see it, or share the website at www.jasonpfrancis.com. All of my episodes from all the people that I've spoke with over the last couple of weeks will be there. Anyway, until next time, you guys take care of yourselves, and that's a wrap.